Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to MCJ Report number 190. I hope that everybody is having a lovely evening, and I hope that you had an even better weekend. I see our regular viewers tuned in. I see some MCJ members and also some people that I've never seen before. So if you tuned in for the first time, welcome to the show. My name is Morgan Charles Jonas. I'm the host of MCJ Report and the leader of Freedom Party of Victoria. Please put your feet up, make yourselves comfortable, go and pour yourself a tea or maybe a beer if that is what tickles your fancy, and buckle up, ladies and gentlemen, because we have a fantastic show on for this evening. That's right, we have one of Australia's finest, a gentleman, a true Australian patriot, somebody that I respect so much. His name is Senator Malcolm Roberts. That's right. Now, I know that a lot of you know who he is. This man I would describe as a beacon of light in a mostly dark jungle. And of course, I'm referring to the mostly dark jungle known otherwise as Canberra. That's right. Malcolm Roberts has an impeccable track record, of course, of standing up for we the people, speaking the truth, even when the truth is inconvenient. And I'm not talking about the Al Gore style of inconvenient truth. We're talking about the real truth, and there can, of course, only be one truth. Now, one of the things that I respect about Malcolm Roberts is that during the height of brutal lockdowns right here in Melbourne, Victoria, when Daniel Andrews was laughing at us and calling us protesters Nazis, and when Victoria Police was firing rubber bullets at us, it was Malcolm Roberts indeed, and there were only a few in office who dared to utter such words. He spoke up and he expressed his support and solidarity with the protesters. He even thanked us for what we were doing and showed that he appreciated our efforts and encouraged us to continue forward. A stark contrast to the likes of Dan Andrews and some other notable people, dare I say, the head of the CFMEU, John Setka, who were referring to the people on the street as nasty, riotous, far right-wing extremists, etc. Malcolm Roberts said, "No, stuff all that. I'm going to speak up for the people," and that is something that I remember, and I know that so many of you, of course, remember as well. Now, this will be Malcolm Roberts' second appearance on MCJ Report. That's right. His first appearance was actually November in 2021, and that was the day that we, the people, occupied the iconic Westgate Bridge here in Melbourne in protest of vaccine mandates. And of course, we see that we have a big, long battle ahead of us, ladies and gentlemen. But the fact that you are here and you're still watching, and the fact that the members of Freedom Party of Victoria are still motivated, we had a great event the other night, tells me that there are more than enough Victorians that have dug their heels into the soil right here at home, that are willing and ready to take on the fight and to come out successful and victorious by any means necessary. So if you think that you fit that category, then go ahead and put that in the chat. Because dare I say, ladies and gentlemen, that certain things in life, well, if they're worth having, they're worth fighting for, they're worth sacrificing for, they're worth doing anything for, if indeed it is something worth having. And you know what I say? I say that freedom is worth having. I say that securing the future for our children and their children, that's worth having. And it's also worth having our justice and banding together like no other time in our history to see that those who are unfit for office are swiftly removed. And if that takes a few years, then I say, so be it. We're here to stay, and the future belongs to we the people, not a select few who have had their snouts in the trough for far too long. Anyway, I just wanted to say hello. I see a lot of you in the chat there. There's Lou, Awa, Bogle, Perth Freedom Fighters, our man Matthew from Perth. Great to see you. Of course, you're having your own issues over there in WA with your Premier Mark McGowan, who, taking after a man that he looks up to very much, Daniel Andrews, he has gone on a plane to China, also to meet with senior officials from the Chinese Communist Party. Mark McGowan on a massive power trip, but I dare say if you were to catch the man alone, you would find out very quickly that he's not all that powerful, as I found out when I confronted Dan Andrews. And what did he have to say to me when he saw me in person? Well, the man didn't even look me in the eyes. That's how strong he is, how weak he is, should I say, ladies and gentlemen. But in fact, it was Mark McGowan who's recently come out and suggested that He would like the entire national cabinet to travel to China. That's right. We know, of course, the debt in our country, right here in Victoria and all over the nation, is crippling families. And we know for sure, well, we speculate very strongly that Dan Andrews, of course, is trying very hard to bail out the Victorian economy. He was knocked back by the federal government. He even had to scrap 5,000 jobs in the public service. And I have speculated and put on record that I believe that the true intent behind Dan Andrews' trip to China is to, well, let's just call it, to re-explore the possibilities of taking out a multi-billion-dollar line of Chinese credit from Chinese commercial lending institutions. And in return for that credit, or should I say the collateral, in terms of what do we give to China if we can't repay the line of credit? Well, we don't know the answer to that question because, of course, these meetings are held behind closed doors. So the only solution, ladies and gentlemen, is to keep the faith. Believe in something greater. That's right. We are here for a reason. We're here to take our country back, and take our country back we will. Alrighty, so what do we have on the agenda for this evening, ladies and gentlemen? Well, as I said, Malcolm Roberts, a man who needs no introduction. Now, I mentioned that Malcolm Roberts actually stood up for we the people at a time when the media were piling on, the politicians were piling on, the union bosses were piling on those who were most vulnerable, which were, of course, we the people who had lost our jobs, we'd been locked down, we'd had our human rights abused, and to make matters worse, we had people in high positions of power striking down at us. But Malcolm Roberts striked right back at them and put himself alongside we the people on the ground. That's massive. I've got a little clip from my original interview with Malcolm Roberts from 2021 November. Have a look. Before we wrap it up, there are thousands of people heading to the tens of thousands on the street of Melbourne, people who believe they've been ignored, and I know that they've been ignored, absolutely. I'm one of them. And before we end the show, is there a message that you would like to share with the people of Melbourne and Victoria?
Yes, first of all, to the protesters, thank you very much for what you're doing. You're drawing attention to the lies, the corruption, and the policies that are costing us lives, costing people their lives. So thank you very much. It takes a lot to stand up to a dictator like Dan Andrews, who has been lying about this COVID, exaggerating it, all for control purposes. So thank you, first of all.
So there you go, ladies and gentlemen, unashamed in his position, standing alongside the people. Now, before I play the interview for you, just a couple little bits and pieces. Now, of course, on Tuesday, it is Anzac Day. That's right, a very sacred day in the Australian calendar, a true part of our culture to pay our respects to our diggers, past and present. I will personally be heading down to the Shrine of Remembrance Tuesday morning, and I would like to invite you to come and join me. That's right, 5:15 a.m. sharp at the corner of Dorcas Street and St Kilda Road. So if you would like to come to the shrine, I encourage you to come once again. That is Tuesday, 25th of this month, Anzac Day, 5:15 a.m. sharp at the corner of Dorcas Street and St Kilda Road. We will attend the dawn service tomorrow. We will remember and pay our respects to Australia's heroes, and they will never be forgotten. After the dawn service, we'll make our way to a local cafe, we'll grab some coffee, we'll have some food, we'll have a great time. I hope to see you there. Alright, also, ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to support the show, you can head on over to mcjreport.com and you can become a member. This, of course, is optional, but by becoming a paid member from $5 per month, you will, of course, support the show and help me to propel this movement forward, help me to keep running MCJ Report. It does indeed take a lot of man hours. That's right, a lot of man hours, a lot of preparation, a lot of equipment, a lot of planning to get this show done. So any contribution would be most definitely very meaningful for the purpose of ensuring the longevity of this show. So if you think that MCJ Report provides a valuable service, if you think that what I do is valuable, and if you think that this movement as a whole and my involvement in it will indeed lead to positive results, then please consider becoming a paid member. Of course, it's optional. If you're going through a difficult financial time, I do not want you to sign up. MCJ Report will always be available. There will never be a mandatory sign-up fee. Of course, I reject all mandates. This is optional. Again, www.mcj.com/memberships. The link is in the description of this video. Every bit helps. And of course, by chipping in, you can help this movement to go even further. So link is in the description. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, I had a really long discussion with Malcolm Roberts. He's a great guy. He was so generous with his time. It was very, very humbling, very insightful. He is a true gentleman. He needs no further introduction. So without further ado, I'm going to play you the discussion that Malcolm and I had. And I'm just going to get it started. So make yourselves comfortable, please, ladies and gentlemen. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are very, very proud and humbled to be joined for the second time on MCJ Report by the one and only Senator Malcolm Roberts. Malcolm, welcome back to MCJ Report. And let me start off by asking you, how's life treating you up in sunny Queensland?
Well, it couldn't be better actually right now because we just had our first grandchild. And thank you, by the way, for having me as your guest again. But our first grandchild, and what's really wonderful for me as a father is to see how fabulous our daughter has turned into being a mum. She's really doing a good job. She's never separated from this little fella, and she, when he's not sleeping, or even when he is sleeping during the day, he's on her chest in a sling, and so they're never separated, and that's wonderful to see.
That is indeed wonderful news, Malcolm, and I know that the millions of people around Australia who very much admire you and your work would, without any doubt, be very, very happy for you. Now, Malcolm, the last time we spoke on MCJ Report, it was actually the day whereby protesters, largely from the construction industry, occupied the iconic Westgate Bridge here in Melbourne. And I distinctly remember you encouraging us protesters at the time, those of us who were out really standing up against Dan Andrews and, of course, the many policies that destroyed so many lives here in Melbourne. Now, we see, of course, a lot of the COVID restrictions have subsided since we spoke last time, but many of the overarching issues from that period still remain. What type of issues in relation to, I suppose, the collateral damage have you witnessed up in Queensland since the doing away with a lot of the COVID measures?
Well, last night, Jonas, I was Morgan rather. I was at a function down in the Gold Coast where I spoke following William Bay, Dr. William Bay, former Dr. William Bay, suspended Dr. William Bay. He spoke for about 40 minutes, 50 minutes, and then I spoke for an hour and a bit. And I asked a question, how many people in the audience, which would have been 300 or more people, how many are mandated still for taking injections? And surprisingly large number are still mandated out. So this is not over at all. Dr. Bay himself, or former Dr. Bay, or suspended Dr. Bay, let's call him that, because it's illegal to call him a doctor now. But anyway, he's living proof of what's going on in this country still. We've seen doctors punish doctors being belted by APRA unlawfully, in my opinion, and certainly inhumanely and unfairly and immorally. And so we've still got that. We've still got the health system in a crisis because we've got so many people now just tell me flat out they do not trust their doctor. And you can't get anywhere in healthcare without trust. There are so many doctors who don't trust their fellow doctors, so many nurses who don't trust their fellow nurses. I think the nurses in Queensland are still suspended. You know, we've got a healthcare system that's in crisis. We see ambulances on the streets so frequently now, carting people to hospital after their injection injuries. So it's still well and truly with us. There are a lot of people now living with their serious adverse events, living with the fact that they've lost a close relative or friend who's died from the injection. And then they can't get any justice. There are so many people now, Morgan, who are actually seriously ill and have long-term side effects from the injections, yet they can't even get recognition, let alone treatment. People won't even recognize that they've got an injury. I mean, we could go on and on. It's still with us well and truly, and there's a lot of pain. But one of the positive things, Morgan, is that people are waking up. There are more and more people now who have converted from being neutral on the injection to now realizing they are a serious problem.
Yeah, absolutely, Senator. I hear what you're saying. And a report was published actually today from the United States. There was and I'm reading from RT.com right now. US settles COVID vaccine injury claims. Just 3 of the 8,000 plus who have filed for compensation got anything. What do you make of that? And do you think we'll see similar trends here in Australia?
We're already seeing them, Morgan. We're getting very few people who are being dealt with fairly and honestly and compensated properly, because to do so would be an admission that the injections are a serious problem and a threat. So they're still covering it up. We've now seen 3 of the rats bailing. We've seen Greg Hunt leave Parliament early, well before he was expected to leave at a fairly young age. He resigned rather than face the next election. That was last May. We've seen John Skerritt bailing in April this year. I don't know if he's resigned yet, but I think it'll be any day if not. And we've seen Brendan Murphy, Dr. Brendan Murphy, the Secretary of the Federal Health Department, give notice that he is resigning as well. So that leaves Atagi, APRA, and Paul Kelly to go, as far as I can see.
And we're seeing them drop like dominoes. And I hear what you're saying, that to grant compensation would effectively be an admission, let's say, that maybe, just maybe, like what the former health minister Greg Hunt stated, the vaccines, well, they'll claim to be safe and effective, but we've actually found out that they're not safe nor effective. And we've actually got a very sad case here in Victoria, Malcolm. You may have heard of her, Vicky Dedurian, Melbourne mother, who has been denied entry to the Alfred Hospital's heart transplant waiting list because of her vaccination status. Now, she has a failing heart and requires to constantly be hooked up to a machine just to keep her heart pumping, and she has a legitimate vaccine exemption. And she will pass away if she doesn't receive this surgery. And the hospital has dug their heels in and they've said, no, if you want to be on this list, you need to be vaccinated. And Malcolm, when is this madness going to end, in your opinion?
Well, we can't put a timeline to it, that's for sure, because people initially thought this was a virus that had to be treated as if it was a severe threat to us. We know, the chief medical officer told me in writing that the virus, COVID virus, was of low to moderate severity. Low to moderate, Morgan. And then if you then stratify the cases into the fact that it hits those with comorbidities, with immune compromised, and also some of the elderly, not all of the elderly, some of the elderly, then you realize this is really a very moderate virus. And in fact, in the graph that the chief medical officer gave me last March 2021, I couldn't get any information from the Prime Minister nor from the Premier of Queensland. I had to rely eventually, after 12 months, got it from the chief medical officer at my request and sent estimates. And he showed on his graph the severity of some past flus was higher than COVID. Yet we went into a panic for all of this. So what I'm saying is that, and we also know that, contrary to what we thought, that there was an immediate reaction going on and people had to fill in the details and come to a plan quickly. We never saw the plan. We never saw the data until I extracted it from the chief medical officer. But the point is that we thought there was no plan. They had to scurry to get something together. They never did get anything together. They hobbled things together on the run. But what we now know is that was rubbish. What we now know is that it was premeditated, it was pre-planned. The intricate integration of all of the different healthcare providers, well, they're not healthcare providers, the healthcare charlatans and agencies that were disrupting health, including APRA, were planned and premeditated years in advance. So this is a long way of saying it's highly complex, highly integrated, interlocking pieces. It's very difficult to break them apart. But I'm very convinced that we will break them apart. I'm totally convinced we'll break them apart. I can't tell you when, I can't tell you how, but it'll be a combination. I've said this for a couple of years now. It'll be a combination of activity from the people, activity from judges in courts, and parliamentary activity. We've seen some remarkable changes in the last couple of months. We've seen the mouthpiece media now starting to publish articles about the injection injuries and injection deaths openly, and I've got to compliment the Australian for that. I've been very critical of Sky News, 2GB, the ABC, most of the media, the mouthpiece media, but the Australian has done a really good job in publicising, I think, at least two articles of two different deaths. I've got to call out and thank Adam Crichton for being strong on this and questioning everything about this COVID gross mismanagement for the last 3 years. He's been a beacon of light in the Murdoch press for calling that out, whether it be masks, whether it be restrictions, whether it be lockdowns, whether it be injections now. So that's happening. We also see, let me see now, in the Senate, we've seen a referral to an inquiry by us and by Matt Canavan with regard to ending the mandates. That failed. But we also saw a request from, I think, Senator Antic. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Alex. He introduced a motion which we co-sponsored, put our names to, requesting the government hand over the COVID, the Pfizer contracts. Now, just think about this. Those contracts, we asked for them last year when the Morrison, Joyce, Little Proud government was in power. We got an answer from the Liberal Party that said, no way will you get them. Now the Liberals are actually supporting that motion from Alex Antic to release the COVID contracts. What we've seen is the Greens, I think David Pocock, I think Jackie Lambie and Tammy Tyrrell, and the Labor Party ganged up to make sure that the contracts wouldn't be released. So what I'm showing there is that we've still got this wall from the Greens and the Labor Party and people like David Pocock, but we have seen the Liberals turn. We also saw Ralph Babette's excellent motion requiring or moving a motion requiring an inquiry into the excess deaths, which are 22,000 for the year last year. 22,000 excess deaths. That's like, as someone put it, a jumbo jet with 400 people crashing once a week. If we had one jumbo crash with 400 people dying, that would be enough to have a huge inquiry. We've had one a week and no one's blinking an eyelid. And I asked Skerritt and the others in Senate estimates why they've got no shame, because they're not even concerned about these deaths. But the Liberals and the National Party supported Ralph Babette's motion to have an inquiry into excess deaths. But again, the Labor Party, the Greens, David Pocock, and I think Jackie Lambie all said no, and that defeated that motion. So we've seen some movement in the Liberal Party, which is wonderful, and some movement in the Nationals. But we're still seeing the Greens now come to the defence of the big pharma.
Rightio. So how many seats need to shift in the Senate in the next federal election for these motions to gain traction and be implemented?
One.
Just one.
Yep. Well, for some of them we'll need two, but here's the state of play in the Senate right now. Well, let's look at the bigger picture. The government is formed, as you know, by the House with the majority in the lower house, the party with the majority in the lower house. At the moment, that's the Labor Party. The Labor Party, though, forms a government because of that. It has a majority in the lower house. But less than 33% of the voters in Australia voted for the Labor Party to be in government. That means 2/3 did not. We've also got a problem in that the Teals only stood against Liberals. That's all, because they're basically Greens and Labor. They're working for the Labor Party. So the Teals are working for the Labor Party and the Greens. So that's the lower house. So quite a few seats need to, I don't know the numbers there, Morgan, but a few seats need to change. But in the Senate, to get inquiries in the Senate, we need just, depending upon what the topic is, just one. Here's what happened. Here's what the current state of play is in the Senate. We have Labor combined with the Greens equal 38 senators. That's half of 76, 76 being the total in the Senate. The Liberals plus the Nationals plus the 2 One Nation plus the 2 Jackie Lambie plus David Pocock, the Teal. He's a Teal, make no mistake about that. He was funded by Climate 200, which has conflicts of interest because it has major funding from people who are receiving billions of dollars in subsidies for solar and wind, and yet they're pushing solar and wind. This is the naked conflict of interest that we see in the Senate with David Pocock and the Greens. So we now have a tie. For the Labor Party to be successful in getting up any of its bills, it needs one vote. Almost always that has been David Pocock. One vote from the tie gives them a majority of 2, 39-37. So Pocock is basically voting with the Labor Party to get their legislation through all the time. We've had some heinous legislation go through. I'm making this a long answer so that people understand. The other thing is that David Pocock is being rewarded by the Labor Party with favors so that they keep him in the limelight. Because if you think about what's going on, up until this last election, in the ACT, we've had 1 Liberal senator and 1 Labor Party senator. What they've done is that David Pocock, being a rugby, and he was a marvelous rugby player, he appeals to the Conservatives. So he's got some of the Conservative vote. So that means we've got a Labor person as a senator, and we've got Pocock, who's got some of the Conservative vote, who is effectively a Labor come Greens person. So that'd be one person to be gotten rid of if the Liberals manage to get that back by exposing Pocock for being what he is, which is a charlatan socialist. He not only that, but the Greens, they used to be somewhat reasonable in supporting orders for the production of documents to get information out of the government, the previous government. Now they've become the guardians of the Labor Party's secrets. They're making sure that very few orders for production of documents motions do they support. David Pocock is similarly doing that. They're both running a protection racket for the Labor Party in government. So all we need is one to get some of those motions up. With Jackie Lambie still opposing things like the contracts being divulged, Pfizer contracts being divulged, we'd need a couple of senators. But here's the shame of it. The Liberal Party, with their recommendations on how to vote, ended up exhausting a lot of preferences. And that enabled a Labor Party senator to become the third Labor Party elected in WA instead of a One Nation. One Nation just missed out. If we'd had that One Nation senator come up in Western Australia, the Liberals would have some power in the Senate to hold Labor back, and the Labor Party would need us to get across. As it is now, the Liberal Party, with all the crossbenchers on their side, and that includes David Pocock, cannot get anything up. The best they can do is stop something with all the crossbenchers. So the Liberal Party dirtied their own nest. They made it very difficult for them to do anything. We came very close in South Australia and also Victoria, so that's where we could pick up seats. So we would only need 2 to make sure we had the balance of power. So that's what we're aiming at.
And what needed to happen differently in Western Australia for the missed out election of an additional One Nation senator?
If the Liberal voters had understood that if they voted for One Nation higher on the preferences, we would have got a senator in. So the Liberals, in some states, like in Queensland, the LNP, the Liberal National Party, put One Nation high up on the preferences, and that helped get Pauline home. But in other states, they didn't. The Liberals have never got on well with Jackie Lambie, but for some reason they put Jackie Lambie on the preferences, her party on the preferences above the line in Tasmania, which we can't understand why. We just cannot understand it. The Liberals have consistently, rather than try and help get a One Nation up, they have consistently, apart from Queensland, tried to throttle us because they don't want us around. So what we need to do is get the true conservatives in the Liberal Party to wake the hell up and start voting Conservative, and get their voters to vote Conservative as well.
Well, that's exactly right, Malcolm. And I think for anybody involved in this space, from either the major parties, the minor parties, and I'm talking about the conservative / freedom / libertarian side of politics, I think there probably needs to be a series of crisis meetings before any of the next elections, be it state, territory, and federal, because I'm not sure how much more Australia can take of this type of governance, which leads to my next question. Outside of
before we jump into that, Morgan, there is another side to this. You asked me what needs to happen. I've been working on this climate scam, exposing the fraud, since about 2007. I was working as a volunteer until I got into the Senate in 2016. I have a very good friend who, well, he was an acquaintance. He volunteered beside me. He helped me. He's become a very good friend. He's a very astute person and a very diligent person, very knowledgeable. He said around about 2013, 2014, it's going to be very hard to expose the scientific fraud that underpins climate claims and energy claims and policies. It's going to be very hard to expose the fraud that is driving the climate claims. He said, the sad reality is that we'll keep working, but it won't be until people start feeling a lot of pain before they start waking up. And he was correct. And now we're starting to see, thanks to COVID, there's been a silver lining. People can now see the fraud that was going on with COVID, and that has shocked them, but it's shocked them into reality. And they look at climate and they think, that's the same. That's the same. All these claims of science, but nothing to back it up. And so COVID has been a silver lining because it's helping people to wake up to governance in general in this country. So the other thing is that the energy policies, the electricity sector are being destroyed, and Labor and Greens and Teals, including David Pocock, are accelerating that. So I think we're going to see, with cost of living pressures, with household budgets tightening because of higher house repayments, because of electricity prices, food prices increasing, we're going to see a lot of people becoming very disgruntled with the Labor Party and with the Greens, and that'll help shift things as well. I think in the next election, there's going to be pain before the next election, and that will move people away from Labor and Greens.
Well, I'd certainly think so. And when we look throughout history at times whereby nations experienced, I suppose, what you could call monumental shifts in politics or revolutionary change, it was generally always during times of tremendous suffering and economic downturn. So if that's where we need to go as a nation to turn the ship around, to start rebuilding our country into something truly marvelous, personally, I think, well, it'd be better to just sort of get it over and done with sooner and later, so we can pick up the pieces and make our country what we know our country is capable of. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I've given my thoughts on that to you, because I've said there will be pain coming, and that will help to accelerate the change. There's something else we need to recognize, and you talked about history. History has shown that some of the lazy parties, some of the dishonest parties, like the Greens, have promised lots of free stuff. And we've had a country right now that's been propped up by high immigration, which has actually hurt us enormously, but it has kept us out of recession. And that's only technically kept us out of recession. Without those high immigration numbers, we would have been in recession many years ago. So that hasn't made it easier for people, because the underlying problems are still there. It's just masked the problems, because officially we haven't been in a recession, because immigrants have come and bought our way out of problems, out of recession status, even though we're essentially in a recession. We've seen declining standards of living, higher costs of living. So people are feeling the pain for a while. But along come the Greens, and after 3 years of misery under the COVID mismanagement and fraud, the Greens in the last election had a very simple strategy. Let's preach integrity, and let's just promise lots of free stuff. The number of people who've told me that they're so disappointed in the people who fell for the Greens line, because throughout history, the ratbags have come along and promised lots of free stuff, but someone's got to pay for that free stuff, Morgan. And the Greens never talk about that. And they're crueling our country. So people will hopefully wake up that they can't just listen to people promising free stuff. The socialists have promised free stuff regularly throughout history, and that's crippled countries. And unfortunately, people don't see that. They don't blame the free stuff peddlers for that. They blame someone else. But eventually, it causes everything to unravel, and you get some anarchy, and you get some instability, and then you get a claim, a movement for some economic reactivity. So that's another thing I think we've got to be very careful of, that people will start to wake up, especially the young who've never been in a recession, will start to wake up and say, we can't just listen to these green bastards giving us promises of lots of free stuff because someone's got to pay for it. What did Maggie Thatcher say? Socialism's great until you run out of other people's money. And there are a lot of people running out of money, Morgan.
Well, that's exactly right. And we think about the case of Venezuela, right? Once a thriving society, and then a recession and the downfall in the price of oil. Fast forward a few years later, you've got tanks running over people in the street and a socialist government out of control. Now, I hope that we don't get to that point here in Australia, Malcolm, but in Victoria, I would say that anything is actually possible. And speaking of Victoria, and I'm not too sure about other states, but we have seen, most definitely over the past few years particularly, a drastic increase of drag queens conducting performances in front of children sponsored by the state. Where do you think this whole thing's heading, in your view?
Well, it's the same people pushing it, Morgan. The United Nations has pushed the Family Law Act from back in 1975 when it was introduced under the Whitlam government through the Attorney General at the time, Lionel Murphy. That has been the slaughterhouse of the nation. I think that's an accurate description people have used, and I'll adopt that. I'm happy to endorse that. We've seen the preaching of sexuality to 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds. That's come from the United Nations. We've seen woke curriculums that have come from the United Nations through our central national curriculum. We see the gender dysphoria that is going on. That's come from the United Nations. We see Dan Andrews peddling his affirmation law, the legislation that says if a parent dares counsel their child to think about what they're wanting to do, then they can be thrown in jail. I mean, that's just heinous. So what we're seeing is that's just yet another way of destroying the family, destroying kids. It's another way also of getting children hooked on a lifetime of big pharma drugs, hormone therapy treatments, what do they call them? Puberty blockers.
Yeah.
We also see mutilation of children. Now let's call it what it is. They call it transgender. That's rubbish. It is mutilation of children. There is no way that anyone under 18, I think probably under 25, can understand gender fully and claim that they want to change their gender. We know that the vast and overwhelming majority of children who claim to have gender dysphoria during teenage years just grow out of it. And what we need is a return to basically strong families and children being allowed to be children, get teachers to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic rather than work activities from the UN. That's where it's all headed. But what we're seeing, we've been very strong, Pauline and I've been calling out this, what do you call it? The transgender aggression on children. We've been calling that out for a number of years, and we were alone for a while in the Senate. Senator Claire Chandler has done some work on it as well. So has Pauline Hanson. But now we're starting to see a real pushback, because the real issue here, Morgan, is child safety and mothers being able to speak and care for their children. And I had the delight of meeting Kelly J.
Keane.
I always get her name mixed up. Kelly J. Keane.
Yeah, it's
stood
beside
her in Canberra. Oh, she's lovely, and invited her back to our room. And Pauline and I talked to her for a while. We listened to her. You know, she was a lefty, she said, And then one day her daughter came home and said, I've just seen a man in my dressing room. And her daughter was 11 years of age. That snapped Kelly J. Keane. She was a mother, and above all, don't get between a mother and her child. And that changed Kelly J. Keane. And now well, you know what she's like now. She's fierce and she's unbeatable. She's a crusader around the world now. So that's what we need to see, more and more mothers waking up. So the second issue is let mothers speak and let mothers care for their children. That's all it is. It's the United Nations. It's Dan Andrews, animals like Dan Andrews coming in and stepping between mothers and their children, and that's got to stop.
Couldn't agree with you more. We're all concerned about these issues, but moving forward, and I think that probably a lot of my listeners are very acutely aware of problems in Australia and the issues we're facing. What can everyday people, average people who are working, taking care of families, what can they do to contribute towards, let's say, righting some of the wrongs of the past from our government officials and crafting a pathway forward to Australia becoming the country that you and I would very much like it to be for our children and future generations?
Okay, I've just been writing a few notes there. The first thing is we need to identify the biggest problems facing our country. The biggest problem, where do you start? There's so many. The biggest problem facing our country is absolutely shoddy governance. We see repeatedly, Morgan, laws being passed in the federal parliament and in state parliaments that not only are not based upon sound data and sound science, they contradict the science and contradict the data. They've been passed on the basis of being woke, getting headlines, looking after vested interests, looking after party donors, looking good rather than doing good. Someone starts an agenda, and the politicians just meekly follow through, file and board. And so what we've got to see is a change of governance method so that we actually get back to governing based upon solid data and solid science. That's the first thing. The second thing is we've got to stop our politicians. We've got to be aware of what our politicians are doing. Where do they get their instructions for? We've talked about so many of the issues. I gave a speech last night. Let's go through some of the issues. It's going to be a long answer as well. Look at what they're doing to our children, mutilating our children physically as well as spiritually and mentally. Our health system has been destroyed. COVID was based on lies. We can't get medicinal cannabis. Family law, we've talked about. Slaughterhouse of the nation came from the UN. The UN underpinned the destruction of our health system and the lies that we were told. The UN is underpinning our children being mutilated. The fourth one is our economic lifeblood is energy. A lot of people don't realize that the primacy of energy, that's being destroyed with UN and World Economic Forum policies. Climate alarmism is scaring kids based upon a crook, Maurice Strong, and that's come from the UN. He was a senior UN official. That's been concocted. So there's the UN again. Our economy is being crippled by a tax system that puts the burden on families and individuals and small business, not multinationals who get away scot-free quite often. So that's come from the United Nations and the World Economic Forum. We see life itself is now becoming anti-human. We see abortion, some people even wanting abortion after birth within the first 3 months, but we now see abortion in many states up until term. We see children being mutilated. We're seeing pedophilia being made almost legitimate by calling it not pedophilia anymore, calling it minor attracted people. So pedophiles are now called minor attracted people. We see our food being tainted with lab meat, in vitro meat, fake meat, bugs. We see farmers being painted as villains. We see our protection systems against the banks being smashed because the regulations favor the banks and the governments are inactive. We see the law, people like Bernard Gaynor being smashed by the law unfairly, being abused by the law. We see churches being woke. We see the voice coming up now, which is just a con. That's to give the Aboriginal industry, more entrench the Aboriginal industry, which is the main problem hurting our Aboriginal brothers and sisters. We see immigration destroying our health, our housing market. We see all of these things, and a lot of them, the immigration included, are due to the United Nations policies and World Economic Forum policies. And so what we need to do is to be aware of that. This is where the problem is. We need to be aware that the majority of politicians in Canberra are not aware of this fact. Increasingly, they are waking up, but the majority aren't aware. Majority don't seem to understand that their party power brokers are pushing these policies, and they're just blindly voting them in. The Greens bring these policies in from the United Nations. The Labor Party then is afraid of losing votes to the Greens, so they adopt the policies. Then the Liberal Party is afraid of losing votes, so to the Labor Party, so they adopt the policies. Every single major climate and energy initiative has been introduced by a Liberal national government, Morgan, every one of them. And then what we see is the Labor Party comes in and ramps it up. We saw that with the Kyoto Protocol. We saw that with the Paris Agreement. We saw that with 2050 net zero. The Howard government introduced the worst policies this country has ever seen in terms of energy. And yet the Labor Party got the blame for it. So what I'm saying is that we've sold out our sovereignty, and we need to reclaim that. So that's the second major problem with our governance, that we are selling out to the United Nations and World Economic Forum. So the first thing is for people to be aware of that. We've got to spread that message. So, and then we need to recognize that the most powerful people in this country are the voters. Our Constitution enshrines that. The Constitution can only be changed if the voters come out in a majority and support a referendum that wants to change the Constitution. So the ultimate power in this country rests in a Constitution, which is under the purview of the voters. And so Australia is the only country in the world in which the voters actually voted for the Constitution. That's the only country anywhere in the world. What we've got right now is a people's constitution. The governments over the last 74 years have quite often strayed from the Constitution. We've got to get them back. And Pauline and I are working on that. But we've got to get the people to be aware of just how powerful they really are as voters. And instead of voting Labor, Liberal, Labor, Liberal, Labor, Liberal, they need to vote for a third alternative. Actually, they need to vote for an alternative, because Labor and Liberal are no different. So they're the same. The policies are the same. Everywhere, they're the same. Differ slightly in degree in some areas. So we need a second alternative, and that's the Freedom Parties, the minor parties. And of course, we encourage people to vote for One Nation, but then you would encourage people to vote for the Freedom Party. So, but that's the point.
Well, those are two very good options, Malcolm. I hear what you're saying, and I agree. If there's going to be change, it's only we, the Australian people, collectively, that can bring about that change. Now, one of the biggest questions that I receive from my members and supporters, they say, well, Morgan, what can we do differently to wake more people up, because this whole process seems to be taking too long? So Malcolm, you probably received this question a bit. What's your answer to that?
Well, last night at the presentation on the Gold Coast, we had a question and answer session at the end. Lots of very fine questions. People are frustrated as hell, and some of them are saying, "Why don't we form some paramilitary? Why don't we take charge?" And I just said to them, "Okay, so the antidote to control is going to be your control. So we can't do that. So what we've got to do, as I pointed out yesterday, is." And the reason I mentioned the Australian people are in charge of our Constitution is that the Australian people have been slack. We're in this mess right now because we as voters have been slack and just voting Labor or Liberal, Labor or Liberal. What we've seen now is we've seen a Labor Party in government with less than a third of the vote, a Liberal Party in opposition with just slightly more than a third of the vote. That means 1/3 of people did not vote for either the two majors. So what we've got to do is recognize that the numbers of people who are voting for the majors are declining. And that gives us a lot of hope. We've got to accelerate that process. We've got to, as citizens, who are aware of what I'm talking about and what you're on about, We've got to make sure our workmates know, our families know. We've got to make sure our colleagues in sporting clubs know, and churches know. We've got to spread the word as to what's going on. Then what we've got to do is our second job as voters, and that is to go and confront our representatives in Parliament. They're our representatives. They represent us as citizens. So we need to say to them, do vote for this, don't vote for that. We've got to tell them, give them instructions on what to do, and tell them the consequences. The consequences, if you don't do what I say, is I won't vote for you. That's that simple. So the best way to do that is not email. The politicians get swamped with emails. First, the best and most powerful is to visit them. Walk into their office and say, I want an appointment with the member of parliament who represents me, is supposed to work for my interest. That'll quite often be difficult, but keep persevering until you get it. Then get on the phones. That's the second best way. Get on the phones and say, talk to their office through the phone and say, I want an appointment. Tell the member that I think this way on this issue. Let them know your instructions to them as your representative. Third way is to write physical letters, paper letters, signed, whether it's handwritten or typed, it doesn't matter. Just make sure you sign it and tell them what you want. So they've got a record in writing. Politicians don't dismiss written letters. They dismiss emails, but they don't dismiss written letters. So there's some of the ways of doing it. And above all, vote. So many people are saying, what's the point of voting? It's disillusioned. The Freedom Party didn't get up. One Nation didn't get up, whatever. Actually, One Nation did get up in Victoria, but you know what I'm getting at. They're saying, what's the point? It's too slow. We just give up. No, the moment you give up, you're essentially sealing the majority to the Liberal and Labor parties. So don't ever give up. Go in and vote properly. Don't just vote informally. Don't write dick and balls on the ballot paper. Just vote formally, vote sensibly, record your vote, because it used to be, Jonas, Morgan, that when we were there again, I love that name, Jonas.
I respond to both, and there's plenty of people that call me Jonas. So, Senator, if you'd prefer to call me Jonas, that's totally fine. Just letting you know.
No. You know, when I was a child, it was 45% people voted LNP, 45% voted Labor. 10% swung. And whichever way they went, that's the party that went into government. Then it became 40%, with 20% swinging. Then it became 35%, with 30% swinging. It's now heading down to 30%, with 40% swinging. And that number, 40%, is greater than either of the 30. So we've seen other parties now being elected. We've seen other parties getting getting to be one of the two-party preferred. And we've seen an increasing numbers of smaller parties in the Senate where we have proportional representation. So it's not over. Don't give up. Keep going. Just recognize that we're in the trend. Just do whatever you can to help the trend.
Excellent advice. So just a little recap, ladies and gentlemen, from Senator Roberts. Talk to everyone you know, friends, family, the guy at the bakery, somebody walking their dog down the street, doesn't matter. Push for appointments with your MPs. Call them, write them written letters, get in front of them in person, give it to them straight. So I very much value your advice, Malcolm, and it's advice that I encourage everybody around the country to take on board. Now, before we wrap our discussion up, do you have...
Just to interrupt, the third one is to vote.
Oh, yeah, of course. That's the most important one. I left out the most important one.
And I missed out another important one, and that is to volunteer for one of the minor parties. Hand out how to vote cards. Turn up and be a scrutineer, because that's very good safety for the minor parties and for your vote, to make sure your vote is counted. But when you vote 1 for your preferred minor party, 2 for the next preferred minor party, 3 for the next preferred minor party. Put the Greens last, Labor Party second last, and the Liberals third last. Or if the Liberals are not doing their job, put the Labor Party third last and the Liberals second last. But either way, put all the minor parties, the freedom parties, ahead.
Absolutely. I agree. And well, in Victoria, we've got some parties arguably more radical than both Labor and the Greens. And I've been encouraging people to put those parties dead last, like the Victorian Socialists.
I said Freedom Party,
okay.
But I should have said conservative parties, because most of the freedom parties are conservative anyway.
Yeah.
Don't vote for the socialists. Definitely not.
No, because if we vote for the socialists, then at one point there'll be no more voting for anyone.
That's a good one.
Well, isn't that what they say, Malcolm? That democracy is the gateway to socialism. Have you ever heard an expression like that?
I can imagine that because it is. It's also a gateway to anarchy eventually, because socialism will bring on anarchy, and then anarchy leads to some people standing up, and we start getting freedom back again, and then we start going on the cycle again. All we've got to do is stop the cycle into socialism and anarchy, and just stay with the freedom and basically free enterprise.
I like it, and feeling ready to get back into action myself. You know, we've
Good.
licked our wounds after the Victorian state election, and you know, I'm there's a lot of us ready for action here in Victoria, Malcolm. And I spoke at an event the other day, and I can tell you lots of Victorians are really fired up, and they've developed a mindset that the change we require will take years. And the mindset and resilience that I've witnessed from people here in Victoria, it's been very, very comforting.
Yeah, it has been. Um, you guys led the way in the stance, definitely. No, seriously, you did, and that was wonderful to people to see. I remember being in the march in Canberra. I don't know if you were there, the big one.
Yep, I was there.
I
Yeah.
thought you might have been. Um, and I remember walking beside my wife and our son and thinking and saying to them, "This is the first time in 2 years that I've felt proud to be an Australian." I was disgusted for the previous 2 years, and then it was so good. And going to Epic Camp and seeing Australians there, no, just free spirited and a complete respect for each other. No one being violent, no one taking advantage of others, but just happy, natural. Epic Camp was just wonderful, and that's the way we're meant to be, larrikins, but respectful of each other and caring for each other. And you could feel it just driving into Epic Camp. You could feel it in the air. It was just unbelievable, and that was wonderful to see. That's the way we're meant to be, free spirited.
Free-spirited, unified. It took
Yep.
a crisis and very widespread persecution of so many people, I suppose. And one thing I've noticed here in Victoria, maybe you've noticed the same thing, but with our members at Freedom Party, because we're a new party, basically born out of the protest movement, a lot of our members have suffered so much over the past few years under this government that I've observed in our members just such a high level of compassion for their fellow human beings, and a real desire to do the right thing by other people, because every single member has experienced a power greater than themselves in government doing the wrong thing by them. And I think that we've seen this very compassionate, a large number of very compassionate, patriotic Australians sort of rise up, and I'm really excited to see where it leads in the future.
Yep, some are. And the other thing we could say with, we just, between us, we came up with 4 things for people to do. The 5th thing I would add is to say that little quote I gave you a little while ago: labels are the refuge of the ignorant or the dishonest. And so when we start spreading the word on what we need and what our representatives should be doing, and educating other voters so that they wake up, we need to remember that we'll get pushback sometimes. And that will not be based on facts. It will be based on labels. And they'll call you dickheads. Um, they'll call you
Nazis,
climate deniers, Nazis, whatever. Transgender,
anti-vaxxers, yeah,
sorry,
anti-vaxxers.
anti-vaxxers, yeah. So they'll call you all kinds of names. When I get called a name, I say, well, thanks, mate. You've just confirmed that you haven't got the data and the logic to beat me. So I've won the argument. If you
It's
had the
true.
data and you had the logic, you would have given it to me, but you haven't. So thanks. So the more they get in my face, the better it is.
And you're not concerned about the labels or being judged or anything like that?
No, not at all. It doesn't bother me. As I said, sometimes I enjoy it, especially when it comes from the Greens, because I'm living rent free in Senator Peter Wish Wilson's head. I walk into the Senate and he starts getting crazy. So,
Really? What sort of
yeah,
behavior have you observed from this
I
individual?
just get called names. Here comes a climate freak again, or whatever it is. So, but I'm living rent free in his head. He
It's
can't.
bizarre.
I've challenged the Greens to a debate. I challenged Senator Larissa Waters to a debate on climate science at a forum we were both part of on the stage back on October the 7th, 2010, which is 13 years ago. She jumped to her feet and said, "I will not debate you." She came up to me straight after the forum ended and said, "I will not debate you." When I got into the Senate, I challenged her to debate me. I challenged her almost on a weekly basis to debate me. She's the leader of the Greens in the Senate. She won't debate me. The Greens know that, and they know I've got the facts, so they're very upset with that because their little fiefdom is under threat. But
Well, well,
so that gives me encouragement.
well, yeah, they won't debate you on climate science. They won't debate you on the vaccine. They won't debate you on the economy. And, I mean, to me, it's pretty obvious. They don't have the answers. And what they've done, just like so many other people, they've adopted what you could loosely describe as some sort of religion, or maybe cult would be a more suitable word for it. And anyone who questions the dogma of the cult must be yelled at and condemned in the strongest possible terms, but never spoken to in a mature manner, let alone any type of public forum or debate.
Well, if they engage with us, people like us, Morgan, who are informed and have data and logic to back us up, they get wiped. They get completely cleaned up. So you see people like Lydia Thorpe, who came into the Greens, people like Janet Rice, who speaks.
Oh,
And
she's from
but
Victoria.
here's some good news. Yeah, they're the two Victorian Greens. Sorry, mate, I just ruined your day.
We produce
But
extremes from both sides, apparently.
but we've also seen Helen Brewer, is it? Helen Kluers or Lewis resigned from the Greens, and she cited the fact that you can't raise any topic without being bashed for being transphobic, in the Greens itself. And so the Greens are now starting to wake up. So my point is that um, people can see it when the Greens are labeling us, and they're thinking, "You're cowards. You just won't front up to a debate." People can see that, and so their own supporters are thinking, "What's going on here?" They're shallow. Their own members are saying, "What's going on here now?" With that Helen Lewis resigning from Ballarat just yesterday, I think, and other people in the Greens are disgusted. They can't even have a civil conversation amongst themselves without being called transphobic.
Yeah, that's right. And I know for a fact that you're not just saying that for the sake of saying it. I have several members in Freedom Party, former Greens members, former Greens volunteers, voted for Greens over several election cycles. But last election, who did they vote for? They voted for Freedom Party because they were under the impression that the Greens were all about saving the trees and being nice to animals. But I think a lot of the Greens members and voters, Malcolm, once they wake up and they say, hold on a second, you want to strip parents' rights and allow 5-year-old kids to, well, you said it, mutilate their bodies at the behest of some, radical doctor who's going to pocket $100,000 in his first year of some sort of transition surgery. No, we're not. And they wake up and they say, no, we're not going to vote for the Greens. We're going to find a sensible party. We're going to support Freedom Party. We're going to support One Nation, and that's it.
Yep. Well, it surprises people, but there's a message I think underlying this. But you would think that Greens and One Nation are at the opposite end of spectrums, but Green supporters and One Nation supporters aren't necessarily the same way. We see sometimes in our scrutineering that people who vote One Nation sometimes vote Greens second, and people who vote Greens sometimes vote One Nation second. And what they're really saying is, I don't want Labor or Liberal. The deluded, in my opinion, vote for Greens one because they like the free stuff. The Greens have a very attractive line. It's bullshit and it's lies, but it's a very attractive line. We will look after you. We'll give you integrity. One Nation says we will look after the country and look after your family. So, but the Greens used to be against Big Pharma. The Greens used to call out Big Pharma. Now the Greens run a protection racket on Big Pharma. The Greens want injection mandates. They froth at the mouth when they talk in the Senate about injection mandates. They love it, and they suppress the divulging of Pfizer's contracts. They suppress the motions to get an investigation into excess deaths. 22,000 people dying a year excess. That's, what do we work out? 400 in a jumbo. That's 50 jumbos. That's a jumbo a week crashing. And the Greens want to turn a blind eye to that. The Greens want to make injections compulsory. They used to be the ones who were standing up and questioning childhood vaccines. Now they're forcing back injections, untested, gene therapy-based treatments. The world is engaged in the largest clinical vaccination trial, said the former Health Minister Greg Hunt when he introduced all these injections. And the Greens are pushing this toxin into people. That's how far the Greens have slipped. They're now inhuman.
Well, that's right. And the Greens are meant to be from the left, as far as I remember. They're meant to be socialists, right? Or maybe a lot of them are champagne socialists. But I mean, you really have to think there's no industry more profit-driven and predatory than big pharma. And all one needs to do is take a bit of a look at Pfizer's rap sheet to understand the inhumane clinical trials in Africa on little children that died during these trials, and the cover-ups and the lawsuits and paying off parents in third world countries after their children had been, let's call it what it is, killed in dangerous clinical trials. And we see the biggest profit grab in big pharma, and you've got the left side of politics saying, yeah, let's sit back and encourage and protect the profits of the shareholders that hold shares in this industry, and any little man that tries to rise up and raise a fist, we're going to strike him down. How's that for standing up for the little guy, Malcolm?
Well, the most important person in our society, I'm making that's a bold statement.
It is.
But see if you can contradict it. But the most important person in our society is a mother.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm absolutely convinced of that. Okay, you need a father to make a child. I get all that, but the mother has by far the biggest responsibility: the nurturing, the breastfeeding, etc. The mother and mothers are different from fathers, and let's celebrate that fact.
Yep.
I actually personally think most mothers are the strongest people on the planet. Most mothers are the most caring people on the planet. Not all, but most. And what we see the Greens doing now, the Greens are supposed to be for female rights. The Greens are suppressing mothers from speaking in protection of their kids with all this transgenderism going on. So they're taking innocent children who are in gender dysphoria and encouraging them to be mutilated. That's what the Greens are doing. The Greens can't see that, or they don't want to see the fact that we've got children who are mutilated, committing suicide, and they blame that on people who are questioning whether they should have had the surgery in the first place. The reality is they're committing suicide because they've made a mistake and they know it, and they're facing a life of mutilation. The Greens caused that suicide. The Greens then tarnish mothers and suppress mothers from speaking to prevent their kids doing it. I mean, there's nothing more hideous than stopping a mother protecting her child, stopping a mother speaking up. Look at Kelly J. Keane. She was once on the left with the Greens. Now she's fiercely opposing them. So people like Senator Janet Rice standing up and condemning people as being transgender, if they dare say, let's question what's going on. And that's not freedom of speech. That's control. That's tactics from the Nazis. The Greens are the Nazis. The Greens had their roots in the Nazis. They came out of the German Nazi Party in the first place.
All righty. Now, Malcolm, let me just say on behalf of so many Victorians and Australians, and without a doubt also our international viewers, I very much appreciate your time here on MCJ Report, but I'd also like to thank you very much for the tremendous public service that you have delivered to Australians for years on end now, and even before your tenure in office. And allow me to say that it is not going unnoticed by so many Australians. They absolutely love you. So thank you very much for being on MCJ Report. And before we wrap this up, do you have any parting message before we go for the people of Victoria?
Well, thank you for your kind words, Morgan. I know they're sincere and I appreciate it. And I get that comment quite a bit, as you said earlier on. The thing that I would say is that I'm just doing my job, and I'm not trying to be humble in any way. Or fake in any way. Sincerely, I'm just doing my job. The real problem is that so many politicians are not doing their job. My job is to serve the people. I mentioned that in the first speech in Parliament. I started with the words "as a servant to the people of Queensland and Australia." Almost every speech, especially any speech more than 3 minutes in length, I start with those words or words like that, because that's what I do. I'm paid by the taxpayer. I'm supposed to serve the people of Queensland and Australia. So what we need to do is to get back to the point where someone doing this job is not complimented for doing the job, but actually just recognized for doing the job, because and that's not the right way to say it, but that it's not unusual for someone doing my job. It's rather the norm. That's what we've got to aspire to get back to. So the second thing, as I would say, in response, in addition to that, is that the people in charge of this country for the last 74 years have not been doing our job. As citizens and voters, we have not been doing our job. We need to wake the hell up and start exerting our response, to start fulfilling our responsibility and electing people who will do their job. The third thing I'd like to say sincerely, stop buying mouthpiece media. The mouthpiece media is working for the globalists. So instead, tune into independent, truth-seeking, freedom-seeking people like yourself. And I mean that sincerely, because I'm banned from Sky News because of my vaccine status, my injection status. 2GB won't touch me because of the same reason. I don't get on Channel 9, Channel 7. I don't get on Channel 10. I don't get on the ABC because they can't argue with me. They can't match my arguments. So what that means is the mouthpiece media, which pushes all the work, and also the globalist predators behind big pharma, behind the major corporations that are running this country, they want to suppress people like myself. So you're the only way we can get out. So our own independent podcasts and other independent media. So thank you very much for what you're doing, keeping freedom alive and the truth alive.
Well, Senator Malcolm Roberts, you are welcome on MCJ Report anytime. We will never discriminate against you because of an alleged vaccine status. What an absolute load of garbage. And you'd expect more from the so-called conservative media. I mean, we can't really call them that. But Senator, you, sir, are an absolute gentleman. Thank you so much. And we hope to have you back on the show really soon. And then thank you for your service. And I know that's probably not what you want to hear because you're just doing your job, but I'm going to say it anyway. And I know that millions of people feel the same way. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I look forward to being back with you, Morgan.
Looking forward to it. Thank you. All right. A massive thank you to Malcolm Roberts for spending an entire hour talking to us here on MCJ Report. And of course, a big thank you to our audience for hanging in there. Such a wonderful interview, so much information. And Senator Roberts, if you're listening, of course, we appreciate your time. Thank you for being a champion of the people. And what you refer to as just doing your job, I can tell you is so greatly appreciated by so many Australians all over the country. And I really do hope to have you back on the show really soon. Alrighty. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that just about brings us to the end of the show. I can see Rumble ticking along there. There's Jess, there's DW, Purple. So if you've got any questions, feel free to put in the chats. Jess saying, must be because you took votes away from... Well, no, I don't necessarily think so, Jess. And that's the beauty of a democracy. If you're an Australian citizen, then you have the right to contest in elections. That's right. So nobody owns any seat. And Freedom Party of Victoria, of course, we wanted to run candidates in lots of areas. And the seat of Frankston, very, very special place for me. I've got lots of really beautiful MCJ supporters in Frankston. And we received a really good result in Frankston, actually. Really, really happy with how it went down in the end. And I go to Frankston regularly. I'm friends with lots of the shop owners. And it was Frankston where I was tipped off about a visit to a a health a doctor's office by the so-called Premier, and it was down a little a little arcade area in Frankston where I just sat on the seat and I waited for Dan to walk on out of that building, and then of course just had a few words to say to him. Thank you, Jess. Thank you very much, Jess. You are awesome, and I just want you to know that you are fantastic. Sharon, there's Considinana. How you going? Probably said your name wrong. Sorry about that. Purple, always a pleasure that you are here, Purple. I hope that you make it to Melbourne for MCJ Report 200, and I hope that you guys like that idea. I would really like to do it, maybe somewhere around St Kilda, South Yarra. I want to have it central to the city so that no matter what side of Melbourne MCJ supporters live on, it will be a central location to make it convenient for everyone. There's DW there, our friend from the United States. Thank you so much for being here. And that just about brings it to the end of the show, 9:20. We've gone well over the hour, and it's just about time to wrap it up. So once again, a big thank you to Malcolm Roberts. Just a couple of reminders if you just tuned in. Tuesday, of course, is Anzac Day. I am calling on anyone and everyone who would like to attend the dawn service at the Shrine of Remembrance to come and stand alongside of myself and several other people. Some people will come from the party, some MCJ supporters, some of my friends. Bring your friends as well. Of course, this is not a political event, so needless to say, no political t-shirts or anything like that. Just an opportunity for us to stand in solidarity, to pay our respects to our diggers, both past and present. And we will be meeting at 5:15 a.m. sharp on the corner of Dorcas Street and St Kilda Road out the front of the shrine. And afterwards, we will go for coffee and breakfast at a nearby cafe. So come on down and let's go and pay our respects to our diggers together. Also, ladies and gentlemen, MCJ memberships, if you'd like to support this show, please go on over to www.mcjreport.com. Become a member. Of course, a lot of time and planning goes into MCJ Report. MCJ Report, it does have overheads. That's right, lots of equipment, lots of resources go into it. So in order to propel the show forward, to keep it viable so that this platform can stay afloat, if you can afford it, of course. If not, please do not contribute. But if you can, and if you see the value in my work and what I do, MCJ Report, Freedom Party, steering this ship, then head on over. The link is in the description. You can become a member from just $5 per month. We have little members meetups, members only emails. There's a few perks, but most of all, you're supporting a cause that you consider is valuable. Once again, if you are going through a difficult financial time, I'd prefer that you don't sign up, but if you can, it would really, really help out and secure this position. So that's that. Alrighty, so anyway, guys, that really brings us to the end of the show. I can see that there's a few people there on YouTube hanging around. Great to see you. There's always a small crowd there on YouTube. Great to see everyone. And there is someone by the name of really Tony Harps. Good on your Harps. Harps and we will be most definitely doing some shooting very soon. That's right. So I'll be happy to post some photos and bits and pieces. But shooting, such a great activity. I recommend that everybody gets into it. You know, there's nothing like being at a range and hitting that target and putting all of your focus and concentration into one perfect shot. If you have experienced that, or if this is something you like to do, let me know in the comments. I recommend that all Australians get into shooting. What a really fulfilling activity to go and relax and recuperate. Who else do we have there? Marianne, how you going? Marianne Fleming, how are you? Thank you. It's great to see you there. There's DML saying parents know what's best for their children. The government does not. That's right. And of course, the government looking to take the role of parents, looking to, and I shouldn't say looking to, but actually activating programs in Victoria whereby doctors can have secret relationships with children in schools. That's right, the Victorian state government refers to that as doctors in schools. Did you know that, Victorian parents? Did you know that doctors that you don't know can go into your child's school have a secret relationship with your child, prescribe your child with drugs that include, but are not limited to, synthetic hormones, antidepressants, contraceptives, and vaccines, and the list goes on and on and on. Parents, be aware, the government is trying to replace you and seeking to become the overarching parent, if you will, of your children. And this is, I tell you what, be aware, parents. Don't take a back seat. All right, what else do we have here? Going back to Rumble. Jess that's, I hope not. I hope not. Sharon, you've been here for the whole time. Great. Alrighty, well, I really appreciate you guys. You know, it's Sunday night. You could be doing anything right now, but you choose to be here on MCJ Report. You choose to be watching the show. So just let it be known that I really appreciate that. Really love you guys. I think that we're going to have a lot of success moving forward. So make sure that you've signed up to the MCJ Report emails. Jump on board with Freedom Party of Victoria. It's not going anywhere. We are stubborn. Our heels are dug into the ground, and I'm just so fired up for the next fight. I'm just like, let me at these people. I kind of feel like a caged animal, just ready to be released to go and do what I do. That's right, and that's all I want to do in life, really, ladies and gentlemen. I want to defend the innocent, protect the vulnerable, and go after bad people. That's right, go after bad people with everything that I have. And join me on this journey. Go to freedomparty.net.au, and it's exciting times, and there's nothing more exciting than a challenge of taking back and building a stronger nation for us, our kids, future generations. How exciting is that? And you have the chance to be involved. That's right. We will fight for our country because we love our country. We love our country. We love Australia. Long live Australia, and long live the great Australian people. How about that? Alrighty. Anyway, I better shut this down, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for being here. Make sure that you subscribe, mcjreport.com, and I will catch you next week for the next episode, MCJ Report 191. Catch you soon.